All right, welcome to Transformative Philosophy. I'm here with a collaborator that I had on the channel for the Philosophy of Lack series, Tim Adalin, who's also the creator and founder of Voicecraft, which is a online community platform that's attempting to build not only a space of deep intellectual engagement, but a space of deep intellectual and spiritual address with a community of people who are trying to include themselves and their own philosophical search and spiritual search into the philosophical content and the deep thinking that has gone on throughout human history, engagement with the greatest minds. And that's something that I've always found very engaging and very inspiring in Tim's work. And connected to that, Tim is now preparing for a course called Transformative Philosophy, which is, from my interpretation, a deepening of the practices which are already going on with Voicecraft, and a sense of a deeper engagement with other minds, a deeper engagement with some of the interesting thought leaders in the liminal web or our adjacent spaces and communities. So welcome, Tim, for this conversation on transformative philosophy. Hopefully we're going to be able to go into a lot of detail with some of the salient dimensions of this course that you would like to maybe unpack and explain to the viewers that they might otherwise say not really understand what this is about. So I think that maybe the best place to start, and it's a place where we kind of left off with the Philosophy of Lack series. That is, in the Philosophy of Lack series, our last video was titled the spirit of address, or just address, and the nature of address. How I sort of framed that discussion was in relationship to the historical character of Socrates, because if you study Socrates as a philosopher, he is constantly, yes, sharing deep knowledge and wisdom, but it's always in a sort of dynamic with others, and there's a certain ethic in his mode of being as a philosopher, which is trying to really go to the core of people's search for truth, and that's always in a dynamic with others. So I guess the first question I would have for you is, what is the spirit of address, and how does this inform your work with Voicecraft and with and this upcoming course?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, it's always so valuable and interesting to hear someone else describe, well, what they see me doing and how they see Voicecraft. It's like it gives it a life, it gives it an angle that cannot be accessed otherwise. And that, interestingly, sort of speaks to the spirit of address a little bit. So the distinction, of course, between address and explanation is one that OG wrote a paper on, OG Rose, who was part of those conversations with us. And I think he named something which might be one of the most fundamental characterizations of the kinds of people ultimately I'm attracted to being with and building relationships with and living with, fundamentally, in an extended sense and an intimate sense. There's something really basic about it. It's just fucking being there. You know what I mean? At one level, there's a way we can speak about it philosophically, but it's important not to lose the simplicity of it, certainly the clarity of it in an important sense. And it's it's just about being there with each other and really showing up, yeah, as best you can in some important sense. Now, even the word showing up, if people are familiar with integral theory or something like that, and lots of that language has been popularized in so many different posts and Instagram shares and all manner of courses, you know, show up this, and even that can become something which these words become laced with a kind of explanation that sort of loses what it is to really address each other. There's something, there's a deep relationship to uncertainty and unknowing that I think has to be held with it. And I think if you follow it intimately enough, there's something profoundly tantric about it in some important sense, like a real openness to possibility, and really participating in that sense in relationship and progressively coming to know oneself as influence in relationship with others. I mean, we're more than just that, of course, but it's I think it's something which can be helpful to distinguish some of the uneasy and sort of toxic juxtapositions that we face when we look out at culture, when we try to contend with such big issues. I was listening to a podcast on Unheard today. I forget the guy's name who was on it, but he was advocating for a kind of collective action without being able to name anything other than, well, we've got a kind of maybe riot in the streets, you know, in response to rising prices of energy and all the rest of it. And it's a wild thing to, you know, and Unheard is a platform that has risen quite a lot in the alternative media space and is seeking to offer content that's trying to grapple with the decisions we have to make in this sort of collective moment. And even there, and I have a lot of respect for their work, but it just struck me as, God, it's so profoundly difficult to communicate in our current moment in a way that incorporates an address of what all this actually means, of what that real meeting, the real is. And so, yeah, in the context of the course and Voicecraft and all of that, at the end of the day, it's really just about being here with each other, doing the best we can to respond to what is in ourselves, in relationship, in the world. I mean, it's trivial. It's the most trivial thing in the world, and yet as well can be profoundly difficult, because the further you go into address of really meeting someone and really contending with the world and coming to know who you are, then all of a sudden the securities you might have of ideology and various kinds of identity and structure, these things can drop away, and there's nowhere else to run, you know. So in a way, it's about not running from oneself and not running from the other, and not trying to dominate them, not trying to dismantle or disenable the possibility for real communication to take place. Everyone knows it when they feel it, of just what it is to actually be here with someone. We take it from there.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great place to start, and just where you're sort of leaving off there, the sort of emphasis here on not trying, you know, basically trying to escape relationships of domination and exploitation and manipulation, which are, you know, which are tricky because of unconscious dynamics, because of political and economic dynamics. Which oftentimes are implicit or at least not made explicit. And what's coming to my mind immediately, because I'm just in the middle of reading Slavoj Žižek's Surplus Enjoyment, is that he has a reflection in that book where he suggests that we are now in what he calls post-capitalist, corporatist neo-feudalism. So basically he's saying we're in corporatist neo-feudalism. And what he's saying there is that before capitalism, there was feudalism. And in feudalism, there were explicit relationships of personal domination. Like, in other words, the society was based on relationships of domination, manipulation, exploitation. And that capitalism allowed for a space of personal freedom at the expense of that we now are under the domination of market exchange, right? Mm-hmm. So selling a course or selling a book or something like that is a form of domination in some sense. There is an asymmetry, but he's saying that it's an upgrade from the form of domination that emerged in feudalism. So I think like we have this situation where capitalism is a mediator of domination in the market, where if we regress to sort of a corporate neo-feudalism, we're going back to these relationships of exploitation and domination. And so in that sense, I just want to situate your way you're framing Voicecraft is actually this space where we can where we're aware that our world is turning into a sort of corporatist neo-feudalism, and that there's this space where we're trying to go beyond it. We're not trying to have relationships of personal exploitation and domination, but we still have, of course, the what you're saying, responding to what is well. We still have capitalist dynamics that we have to work through, and so forth. So I think just that's a nice practical connection there, and I do also want to echo sort of the raw realness you're bringing when you say it's just fucking being there. And it's the simplicity, it's the clarity of that is oftentimes missing. And like my experience in the university has often been where you get this feeling like the person isn't really there, like you're just interacting with an abstraction, and again, it's not. And so, abstract content, and this will connect to my next question with abstract content, but you just get this feeling like it's just abstract content and there's not really a person being there relating with you. And I think that dimension of spirit, if we want to call it that dimension of spirit, is just, it is a simpleness. It's simple. It has no content. It has no content, but at the same time, it's everything. So I think that's a really nice aspect of not only Voicecraft, but this sort of the emphasis that you're bringing in your work here. So I think like my next question would be, you bring up in your nice intro video to Transformative Philosophy course this idea of a philosophical problem, which is how I understood it was it's knowledge in terms of content, which just reproduces the fixed without context. And I do think that is fundamentally a problem. Like, for example, I give the example of like, if you're just reproducing, I remember when I was in my doctorate, my supervisor would just reproduce the same course year after year, because the university would just reproduce the same course year after year. So it's just the same. I went and I attended all 4 years of my doctorate. I attended every time. And it's the same every year after year, no new context introduced. And so when you're trying to approach philosophy and designing this course, how do you go about approaching it from a contextual point of view, as opposed to a content point of view?
Yeah, right. Well, the first thing is that there's a number of things at once, but we can just start with that the faculty, so yourself, OG, Johnny Miller, Layman Pascal, Chris Mastro Pietro, these are all people who I have only related to in a spirit of address. they're people I trust to show up in that mode. I believe they are who they, well, it's a difficult thing to try and encapsulate anyone. I was going to say, I believe they are who they seem, but of course I only have very, limited perspectives on any one person. But like, as we are now, I know there is an openness with you to explore what is here, and we're really only limited by time and energy. And in some important sense, time and energy become some of the key constraints that we have to fold in and be responsive to in order to be able to coherently address and begin to understand and explain to each other, as well, like what is actually going on. So one of the threads I'd like to remember, and I think this is something that will unfold throughout our dialogue, or at least I hope so, because this this idea of a course and the financial exchange that takes place and how that relates to this context we're each seeking to build. And I mean that both in the case, Voicecraft is an example of this, but it's part of a broader ecology, and there's an energy among so many people that desires to connect with others who they can actually be responsive to the world with, because there's so much that's changing. And for those who want to be with that change and to have some capacity to orient their lives in a meaningful direction, we need each other, and we need to come together, and we need to develop structures and ways of communicating and understanding and sharing all of that can help afford us to make wiser decisions in the world and to build communities, build subcultures, aspects of culture as such, in order that we might move in a way that is worthwhile in the world, I think. And I want to fold that into a more direct response to your question. And so the question was in terms of designing the course, and how do we hold to that spirit of address. So the idea is, for someone who might be interested to be part of it, in what way could they feel confident? Because that's all I could offer. All I can offer is a pledge. Hey, all I can do is invite and then fulfill or not. And so there's no guarantee, right? There's no guarantee. There's no certainty in any of this. But I can say that the context of Voicecraft, and as it has been for these last few years, and in keeping with the dedication that I've met the world with for longer than that, you will have the opportunity to show up as who you are in relationship to who you could be, and you will meet in the channel of communication others doing the same. And in some important sense, the rest is down to you, except this is a course. And I say it's a course because this is really one of the first significant efforts I've made to try and do something a little bit more comprehensible, a little bit more accessible to the ways things are done. If someone wants to try and strategically gather people for a purpose, there's other ways to do that, of course. I mean, I'm really just looking to identify the language of signaling fundamentally, because I'm, in a way, I've come around to it now, and I feel good about this. I'm very glad to be taking these steps and making this invitation. There's a sense in which this course is something which has been already lived out with different people, slightly different people being involved, in the context of the relationships I've been most involved with in the network and beyond. everyone apart from layman who's part of the course is someone who's either been on the podcast before or has been involved in a network session in some way. And the regular coming together that many of us have participated in inside the network has been constituted by real conversation with each other about plenty of things that really matter to us. And but I've offered that for free in the sense of financial exchange. There's been but these are real relationships, and so there has not been, I would say, any, the quality of the interactions we have and the conversations must involve and does involve a reciprocity of exchange with respect to how we treat each other. So it's not like I'm entering interactions just giving everything without being nourished in return in some important sense. But I have done this now in many ways, and not to lay this all at the feet of the network whatsoever. It's a path I've chosen, and we've walked a similar one with respect to creating content and sharing a lot online, and trying to do so in a way that's in some important sense staying true to the spirit of how we're engaging with the material and staying true to the spirit of the relationships we want to be a part of. And I've explored a number of different ways of seeking to bring energy in the form of finance, in the form of money into the project, to afford it to build as I see that it can, and as I feel so driven to do, in order to respond to what is, like, at the end of the day, I'm wanting to be part of a network, multiple networks of people who can address each other with integrity to respond to what matters. And I use those words. They're abstract words in the sense that they are, I'm not naming a specific thing that matters other than the implicit quality of communication. So it's all kind of built in, like the concrete real is built into that abstraction. But so much of the expression that I've shared over these years is there for anyone who wants to listen a bit deeper and really feel the intensity of it. Because, what is at the cultural level really is quite fucked. And unless we develop the capacity to address each other well and develop an ecology of beings who are doing that, then, well, things are going to get... I cannot really see anything else to do at this point that is a better idea than that. We need each other, and we need to communicate well with each other, and we need to be able to do so with intelligence and with wisdom and with care and with courage. And we could just list all these virtues, and maybe you could nest them in different ways, and we could talk about that. And there's a whole bunch of theory and categories and philosophies we could try and nest optimal or effective ways of understanding the kind of culture and understanding the kind of relationships we want to build for a variety of ends, without putting those ends before the means, in a deep interweaving with the realization and the imagination of those ends. That's all of that requires an ongoing return to address. And so, in terms of designing a course, well, the practical aspects of it is I think anyway the most valuable parts of it. for people will be the experiences they have speaking with their peers, and of course there'll be lectures and workshops and opportunities to engage with material, share writing, speak in front of one's peers, but fundamentally the relationships that are developed, and the contexts for speaking and the context for listening, it's right there. It's that's what really matters. Now I've been trying to create that. I've been trying to create context. Nora Bateson has a beautiful term that's mutual learning environments, I believe, something like that. And that's naturally what I've sought to create and be part of, contexts where people gather together and take themselves on a course, like live the journey of life together. Now we're all doing that, and this is just an effort at consciously seeking to invite people together to do that. This course is a step into opening up a means of exchanging with the participants of the course, and also the faculty, and then also some of the guides and facilitators that will be part of the network. That can, I think, it's an effort in moving into a new chapter of how to develop this context to bring energy and resources in that offer that financial exchange as a form of contribution, without which it's becoming impossible to show up and fulfill invitations to create context. There is this reality which must be met, and I've tried in a number of different ways to bring resources in and seek support. I mean, we could speak about it philosophically in terms of the absolute, like a fundamental lack that our culture has of seeding value back into the commons. To use a Bardian term, it would be to exploit, exploitation into the commons. There just isn't that, because we're so squeezed for seemingly requiring short-term return on any wealth in terms of money that we have. The intergenerational transmission of resources seems like it's broken down in a very important way. And I mean, I could go on about that. It would take us in somewhat of a different direction, but I do think we live in a time where there's something profoundly broken about the wealth that exists in our society being offered back to cultivate contexts of living together in a way that actually enables address fundamentally. So there's a lot to sort of unfold and unpack there, and this is the perfect place, to do that with you, because I think who I'm inviting to this course, I mean, it's fundamentally anyone who comes into touch with the material and the invitation and feels called, but there is a sense in which I've said what I've said, and I've made the signals that I have, because I have a sense of I have a sense of the various people I've developed relationships with and provided value to, and I know how much some of the context that I've been involved with has been valuable to them. And for instance, I know how much the Philosophy of Lack series was appreciated by several people, and I strongly suspect there's more of those people, and this is a call to step in and participate and really get to know those who are involved and involving themselves in this way. we take it from there, so it's an on-ramp of a kind, but it's only going to be recognized by a very small percentage of people, I think. But it's an on-ramp into something which most courses are really not doing. This isn't a course where you take it for an accreditation and then you're sort of out there needing to somehow connect what you were doing to something which doesn't really care about that lived context you were just in, might not really value it at all. It's just taking it as a token somehow, for people who are wanting to. It's a course by name, but the reality is it's a set of invitations to participate with people that I'm pledging are of value fundamentally, and in that process learn together and contribute together and look toward building a context that's worthy of belonging, both in the sense of voicecraft and what that can be, but in the broader ecology. I really have to stress that, like, that's like part of the work I feel you and I are involved in is understanding in what ways can different networks collaborate in this broader effort, trying to create context where people can find their wiser pathway toward communing with those who are most relevant for them to commune with. And so yeah, there's a lot there. I hope that addressed a little bit what you were getting at anyway.
Oh yeah, there's a lot there. I think again, I guess trying to connect it to what I was trying to point towards with my first response as it relates to this fall into a potential corporatized neo-feudalism. There's a way in which without, in the traditional way of thinking, there was this passage from feudalism through capitalism to socialism or communism, right? But capitalism was a passage, right? Capitalism wasn't a final resting destination. Capitalism wasn't the end goal, but you also couldn't discard of it, right? You had to pass through it. And the passage, and so what happens, so the idea is, if you discard it, what happens is you don't get freedom. You just fall back into feudalism, right? Mm-hmm. So you fall back into relations of personal domination instead of, the relations of market domination. But also, like, the problem is like when people are operating with market domination as their main telos, like that is my end goal, well, then that also becomes fundamentally problematic. So then capitalism is no longer a passing through, right? So like the way I've tried to frame it in the work I'm doing, which I really relate to the way you were describing your relationship to voicecraft, being, okay, I'm trying to cultivate this space of the commons, right? But there has to be some sort of reciprocity of exchange, which does have a dimension to it, which is capitalistic. And so like the way I'm trying to frame it is like, I've got to include that capitalistic dimension as a passing through. I've got to include that capitalist dimension to get to the end goal, which is not capital in itself, but which is, who knows what the right word is? Is it building a commons? Is it something like socialism? Is it something like communism? What words do we use? We can debate. That's a whole other debate, right? Like, but I do like the word. I've used the word in my own work of the commons, and I think that speaks to what you're like. I really also like what you're trying to think along the lines of how can networks collaborate to find the wiser pathways. And I think that's where we do get into that dimension of, if capital is your main driver, then that is an inhibiting factor to potentially the networks collaborating. But if your end goal is the commons or something like the commons, then I think that opens up more pathways, for wiser pathways for networks to collaborate potentially. And then in that context, we should always be aware of the the ways in which opening yourself up does involve risk. Like you open yourself up, and I think you were saying something like all of the people who you've invited to teach at the course, you feel like they are who they are, right? And then there's this idea, you can never fully know the other person, and there's always one of the things that I'd like to bring in from Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra is that he said on his path of going to the overman and teaching others how to go to the overman, he says he allows himself to be deceived, because he doesn't want to constantly be worried about, is this person deceiving me? Oh my God, like, because you can never
try having a psychedelic trip without doing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you throw psychedelics and
everyone's just a weapon. Everyone can just fucking go mad at any point.
Right. You have to open up that trust. Well, you open up that shamanic space, and who knows, right? And the thing is that the reason why deception is such a tricky thing is because, well, people deceive themselves. People don't even really know who they are, so, but you also have the, of course, there's the other form of deception where people are like, actually you can't really trust that person. And also Nietzsche also says something about trust along the lines of like, you allow yourself to be overly trusting, even in the potentiality of deception or being betrayed and things like that. And like, he has this reflection along the lines of like, metaphorically, if a snake bites you and poisons you, metaphor for like someone deceiving you, that you thank the snake. You thank the snake for waking you up. Not you thank the snake for poisoning you, but you thank the snake for waking you up. Oh, I was sleeping. I still have a long way to go, and so forth. But that's another thing. But yeah, so just this idea that I do think what's at work with both your work and my work is a type of a stumbling towards commoning, yeah. And that stumbling does involve making mistakes, trying to figure out how to relate, trying to figure out how to build trust, trying to figure out how to build networks. And in that context, the Transformative Philosophy course, and including, bringing a space where people can meet other people with a similar telos, a similar ethos, is extremely important. Now, connecting to the sort of next question I would have for you is there's this idea in Zizek's philosophy of what he calls a parallax reel. And a parallax reel is kind of like where you have two opposing forms of thought, and the reel is kind of the gap between them. So like they just, and so like this creates a lot of tension, creates a lot of friction, creates a lot, you can think about it like and I would like to think about parallax, well, the way I try to think about the parallax reel is very concretely in like relationships between parents and children, or relationships between two lovers, a girlfriend and a boyfriend, a wife and a husband, a boss and an employee, or someone who's built something and someone who's a leader and a student, right? You can have parallax reels, and I think that leads into the next question, because in your emphasis on context over content, you emphasize that you want the Transformative Philosophy course to be emphasizing processes of encountering, navigating, and metabolizing, which is a great word, content, right? So in that, in emphasizing processes of encountering, navigating, and metabolizing, how do you, I mean, are you focusing as a leader, are you focusing on holding that space for disillusionment, holding that space for disruption, holding that space for tension. How do you think about this?
Yeah. Certainly being in the tension, certainly being in the intensity. And yet this is because of this endeavor being something that is taking on a duty of care of a kind. And there's something to respect about how some people, no doubt, are coming into contact with me, with you, with the course, and then investing in that. And I've presented it in a way that is hopefully approachable, in a manner that feels in a kind of integrous continuity with course as such that they encounter, right? And because of that duty of care, there will for sure be intensity that should certain kinds of intensity arise, some dwelling with that to a point will be appropriate, and beyond it may be inappropriate. And so from the perspective of but my stance in relationship to that, to the degree I was part of that communicational channel, can only be as someone who is, well, yes, in a position of leadership. And at the end of the day, if I'm part of the Zoom room, then that's all powerful, in terms of who gets to stay on the channel. I mean, I've never muted or kicked anyone off any Zoom ever, but obviously that's a reality. But in the main, the navigation of that intensity, of whatever the difference, whatever the silence, whatever's present, is something I would meet as a being there. And I'm someone who's willing to, in this case, be with quite a lot of intensity. So, we have to see, the reality is that, so those words, encountering, navigating, and metabolizing, those might poetically speak to an area that I'm certainly not in this company going to speak on with anything approaching even intermediary expertise. That is the Hegel's work and what have you. I do feel that to the degree that we could think of Hegel's philosophy as some sort of water one could drink, I feel I can drink that water well. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm constituted of a lot of that water, but I could not explain to you in the language of Hegel what that water might be comprised of, and yet I can address it. And if we think of encountering, navigating, metabolizing, this is something I think that in your module you'll likely speak to from a different angle, with a lot of profundity, because we have an orientation, we have a momentum in life, we are at least somewhere, something is occurring, and if we attend to that, I think we find that it's we are already moving, we are part of this, and we encounter reality in a multitude of its forms. This parallax view, what was the term exactly? Parallax?
The notion of a parallax real, like that the real is the difference between the two.
Yeah, exactly. And so and you use the example of lovers, of family, leaders to students. one of the ways that I
just a thought on the lovers thing is an interesting way to think about this is if you look at when people get divorced, usually they cite as the reason for getting divorced is irreconcilable differences.
Right.
So it's this idea that the parallax real was unsublatable.
Right. Right. Totally. It wasn't possible to metabolize it in a way that was, ultimately healthy for the body in some sense. You couldn't breathe it through the full way. I mean, I could use the word spirituality to refer to something like that process, and Forrest Landry has a really nice characterization of this as and he doesn't, I don't think he uses the word breathing, but of course, etymologically, the spirit and spirituality has a lot to do with the breath. Breathing in the world through the prism of self, and then religion in to complete that's the weaving of that dyad of spirituality and religion would be the integration of the self into the world. So, and yeah, I notice in myself, even, I mean, here's something that I hope will be met by people who come along to the course is indeed, I think, core to what Voicecraft as a context for conversation has been founded on, and that is the opportunity to meet and be with that tension. And I use the words and maybe you bring this up, but I use the words in the video, becoming and return, somewhere along the line, a process of becoming and return, in a way that's what it is to meet that tension on the tip of, we could think on the tip of one's tongue, is it emanating from the heart of the body, in touch with what is, and we are in touch as well with the potentiality of what we might bring into the conversation, of what we might bring into the relationship, and all the causative effects that will have on the channel we participate in. And we can come to know ourselves as crafting our voice, as navigating. We can come to recognize what it is to be with and craft that tension, and then breathe it through. Stay attentive to the degree we can to the process of metabolization and return to being here. So, there's a sense in which this is a profound opportunity to bring into consciousness that which one is called to bring into consciousness, but also what reveals in potential to be spoken into reality. And this is getting close to, I think, what I'm trying to point at with the transformative philosophy. And content, of course, is crucial. I actually had a few minutes at the end of the video which I took out because I didn't want if it was probably going to overload the video too much, where I was really trying to be even more comprehensive about the importance of content in some important sense. I mean, we will be sharing content with each other, but it is about we are that in relationship with content and context fundamentally. And so it is about returning to, well, again, the here and now. And there's a sense in which I've gone through a loop, we could say. I've gone through a certain kind of cycle. It follows a pattern of, there's a feeling of a kind of intention, and then there's an event, and then there's a response to that, and, maybe even I'd be very curious to try and bring in some of the language you use in terms of words like negation, for example, as an angle in on, metabolizing, on integrating as well. That would be quite interesting, because integrating doesn't, if we could think about whole making or somehow becoming whole, but so much of what might be required for us to come into a wholer, comprehensive understanding or touch with others and the world, of course, could involve a tremendous burning off of actually that which was delusional, of that which was not. In fact, what you initially thought it was somehow out of touch in an important way. And this would speak, just to say a final thing, to the intensity piece a little bit, because to really address, to really engage in transformation, to become at all is absolutely to become aware of what one is not, and what one's lack. And this can be profoundly painful to the to the identity structure. And to say one other thing, this course is not about, hey, come along and you're gonna transform. Like, this is just pay some money and you're gonna get to transform. It's like we can actually, there's an intensity to this, and because of the depth of this process, but also we have to hold this, and it is invited in a spirit of lightness. This is a context in which there's an opportunity to develop relationships with peers, develop friendships, and recognize that over time we can learn to express ourselves better, we can listen more deeply, we can create the time with each other to craft our voices and craft our being in the world, and support each other through that. And that's the work of a life. That's the work of a life. And this is an on-ramp to those that hear the call of this and are just feel themselves to be in that right place of wanting to be supported, yes, because there will be support. And there does need to be support for many people, and we all need support. But also, the reality is, like, I truly, like, this is just speaking for myself, but right now I am committed to this process, and in some important sense, like, I'm like we can make it explicit because it is what it is. I am pledging my leadership to support a context wherein these kinds of processes can take place. And it's a portal through, we were using the word portal before we started recording, it's a portal through to contexts and projects and relationships that are that I have no authority over whatsoever. But I am someone who, like, I have been able to bring really beautiful people together who treat each other well, who have developed friendships, are developing projects, developing relationships, and this is how right now I need to do this, because if there isn't a financial exchange involved to support the time and the energy, then it's not possible. And that is what it is. But it hasn't been how I've been doing it. I've been giving a lot without that financial exchange, and it's not. It no longer makes sense as a viable way of being in the world. Doesn't mean that the relationships that are present or that will be developed are going to be conditioned fundamentally by financial exchange, but it means that there, in a way, there's a trust there that has to be even deeper. It's an even bigger ask. That's one of the sad things about it. In a way, it's like there's an and that's part of, maybe that's part of the membrane of this, in terms of the appropriateness of signal. There's even more trust involved, like to fulfill the promise of what this is. And that's a difficult thing for me to feel the energy to communicate the presence of, because I do struggle with, and I really dislike having to signal in so many ways across all these mediums to people who that I value and am committed to valuing and treating with dignity, in a way that is impossible to address on those channels. And so it's a strange fucking game. But like, a lot of what seems to happen is that there's a game of contorting language and expression, so that it doesn't signal just another expression of the simulation, expression of some exploitative effort at selling someone just another course. And because I think we're so jaded by it. We're so fucking jaded. But it's like, we are where we are. On the cultural piece, maybe that sounds depressing to people. I'm inviting really the grappling of this with me, to everyone who's listening. This very endeavor is we're in the navigation and the metabolization of it. Do you know what I mean? And I'm trying to make that explicit. And so the fact that we're nested in a course, it's labeling itself as that. And by the way, the people who are part of the course will also be able to attend network sessions and stuff that's already happening, right? So it's not like there's just a confine there. So yeah, but on the cultural piece, in terms of what to name this or that, capitalism, feudalism, all these types of things, when I think about what I'm trying to do and what I see others doing, trying to do, and to sort of develop and cultivate viable contexts for living and dying together over time, living well and fully, and treating each other with dignity and integrity, all these things. I think about a triple in a relationship between belonging, education, and contribution. And if we think about the commons as mapping or being linked in an important way to the context for belonging, metaphorically, we could sort of think about it, or imagistically, we think about it as the space around the fire one's welcome to be who they are, right? As they are. But in order for that fire to remain lit, well, eventually people are going to have to gather the logs, and they're going to have to learn how to do that, and then contribute to the context that enables that belonging. And so bringing to consciousness what contribution, for example, is, and in its different forms, and coming to appreciate different roles people play and what they have to offer, and nesting that in a philosophy of energy and energetic exchange, something that's capable of incorporating economics, and all these topics are, you know, they're beyond me in many important ways. I mean, I have my perspectives, but there's, I say in the video, as an angle on the kind of philosophy I'm interested in, or something like that, is philosophy that can incorporate the whole of the energetic context, seeks to incorporate the whole of the energetic context in exchange. I mean, to the degree it can, it's openness to that, right? Not doing that would be sort of consigning to a sort of a kind of almost like an exploitative unconsciousness, something like that. We can't look at that thing. We can't look at who's getting paid what here, or whatever. Just be silent about that, you know. Let's not pay attention to that. We have to take energy in exchange seriously, and we have to, I think one of the things we need in order to be able to really do this is to, and to link it back to the question, and then, you know, and then pass it back over to you, is this this parallax real, this recognition of tension and difference, and the fact that we are so interdependent, or can be, with one another, unless we're fucking each other up, you know. But that there are qualities and roles and different ways of contributing, and it's clear that our culture lacks a capacity to value all the different roles that might have, let's say, archetypally have been sort of developed, or you know, crafted themselves, took form over time in different tribal contexts. And I do think we should consider them in terms, in an evolving sense, in an adapting sense. But in this course, at least, you know, I think the people that I'm inviting to come together are worthy of receiving money to learn with, to support their ongoing work, but also to support the kind of context within which people can develop relationships and deepen their relationship to their own voice and how they touch and meet the world, so that they can bring themselves to interaction with others and the world in a way that's more capable of authentically realizing their potential. And it's a in a way, it's a grandiose thing, but that is, at the end of the day, what I'm in dedication to. Hey, so just an effort at trying to attend to the whole of the energetic context that has to be taken into account in order to with integrity actually pursue that. And it's an ongoing process of reflexively understanding what was lacking in one's understanding before. And that's why we have to develop a commons that we can communicate with each other in a way that is fundamentally anti-rivalrous. You know, that if we develop this, we could say language wouldn't be quite right, but if we can develop we could say communicational field, participatory wisdom commons, if we can develop and cultivate a context for belonging that that can, well, it would be trivial to say can add value to everyone's lives, but there's something we all partake in. People use the word substrate or something like that, you know, but we participate in life together, and we, in dedicating that together, can help each other out a lot. And without that, it don't last very long. That was a terrible way to finish that bit of expression there, but I think you know what I was trying to say.
Well, in some attempt to connect this idea of an anti-rivalrous commons to the parallax real, just proposing the idea of like an anti-rivalrous commons as a hypothetical idea, because like, for example, I think a lot of people, when they emphasize, and correctly emphasize, the types of values that we might find in tribal forms, we can often forget that tribes were often constantly in rivalry with other tribes, for territory, for women, for resources, for a whole bunch of things. But the idea of an anti-rivalrous commons to me is, if it could be situated with a parallax real, the commons would have to be led by a type of tantric or absolute knowing, which was capable of occupying the real as such, which would be neither of the two opposing perspectives. So, like, you're not like the type of leader of the anti-rivalrous commons would be not some holistic being, but kind of like this weird Kraken being. Like, I'm here thinking about like the birth, like the place where birth happens, like a crack. So someone who had occupied, for example, both the parent and the child, someone who could occupy both the man and the woman, someone who could occupy both the master and the slave, or the employer and the employee, so to speak. That yes, they are both and there's also the crack, which is the shaman, or which is the position of knowing in a certain interpretation. But that's a very strange type of being. That's like, that's what I would call a being of the crack. But I'd imagine that the being of the crack requires something like a transformative philosophy to come to be. The crack, and and that does, I think, in my language, involve sort of like a negation for metabolizing oneself, right? Like, I think one of the words that's often used by Hegelian philosophers to communicate this notion that desire is negation is, if you desire food, for example, you negate it because you metabolize it, you destroy it. Exactly. You destroy it. You desire food, you destroy it. And oftentimes, when we're in a love partnership, we can destroy the other in metabolizing them, and we can negate them very easily. And also in our metamorphoses to becoming something like this being of the crack, well, we would have to negate ourselves. We have to metabolize ourselves. We have to eat and shit out ourselves. We should never forget the shitting component of the whole equation. Yep. So my connecting question here would be, one of the things you say about this course is that it's a deepening of the conscious relationship between themselves, the others, and the world. So one of the things that I would ask here is, how do you think we can bring philosophy to the context of parents and children, brothers and sisters, friends and cracks between friends, and these practical dimensions of life, and also the capitalist dimension of life, where you have, for example, I think reflected in your speech and also reflected in my experience, is that to build something in the capitalist world involves an internal fight against the pleasure principle, because it's not inherently pleasurable. It's something which is even painful and at the same time necessary, it seems, as a transition to something like a common. So, how do we, in this course, deepen our conscious relation to these dimensions of things, which I do think is the place of deep philosophy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's in a very important sense, it's a question that's beyond me, and is in part why all of this effort is about developing a context and set of relations where these questions can be grappled with and lived with together. I could you know, to only, in a sense, to address those questions in some sense, well, is to be here and now and grappling about this with you, grappling with this. I think one of the, in my mind, I keep returning now to wanting to, like, certainly to just note that the commons that I'm referring to, and I take we're both referring to, is not seeking to be totalizing in some sense. It's certainly not seeking to deny the reality of, and also the awesomeness of, competition and rivalry. It's not about sort of I don't know if I can, I don't think I'm using the word technically, but if it's not about negating the existence of rivalry. And this is perhaps, if you want to speak about it in a sort of process philosophical way, it might be that the move of sublation would be a sort of a transition in some important sense. I don't know how clear that's going to be for people. But I would certainly see the importance of market functionality and rivalry in the context of seeking to provide the best product or to do something the most efficient way, and to, as something that is like a critical mode of aspiration. And certainly when it comes to things like sport, and also a certain movement in philosophy. It's certainly the case that the philosophical relationships that I aspire to and want to participate in are seeking to be in relationship with truth, not as a static thing, but there is even if we want to say beauty as well, there's a carving of the sculpture. There's a clarification. There's a confrontation that is a profoundly necessary thing in seeking to do philosophy. And yet, that mode, I think, has to be held in relationship to this, and I think it is more fundamental, but not separable from a mutual enterprise. Enterprise is a market word here, but a mutual project, mutual effort, a mutual way of being and knowing and encountering, navigating reality as creation with each other. And so and then I think there could be another category where you could speak about maybe non-rivalry or something like that. And I often think about that in terms of the state. And these are just dynamics I'm trying to work with. I would like, this is kind of intellectual work I need to return to time and time again for years and years to come, to try to understand, for instance, what would the relationship of governance be in relationship to then market functionality and commons functionality. And a lot of our conversations, and certainly this one, is speaking about the sort of an essence of, or a dynamic of, the commons conceived in a profoundly spiritual and religious sense. That's touching on the sort of like a fundamental mutuality of our participation. The manner in which we are interpenetrating one another in a dance, always in some crucial sense, and yet we come to awareness and participate still in the face of difference. And so there's this just an onwards process of this. But to answer your question in terms of how this course could, seeks to create the conditions where we can, all of us, come to more consciousness about our relationship within ourselves, with others, and the world. Well, it's always available to meet when we sit with someone, when we move with someone, when we encounter anyone at all. So in some sense, that this becomes like a very like a combinatorially explosive consideration in my mind, and it would be probably helpful to narrow it down. But the course has been designed in a way so early on, Johnny Miller will run a couple of workshops. You could attend both if you wanted to, but I think it'll be mainly like one workshop repeated to cater for different time zones. And then there will also be sort of conversational response to that at another time. But in that workshop, it will be about a snapshot of it would just be to do with cultivating the capacity to regulate one's nervous system with a range of different techniques, so as to develop more capacity to be able to modulate oneself in relationship to others and situations in the world. If it's possible to do that, to have that capacity to, with a, we could say a metacognition, but just the capacity to consciously modulate one's physiology to be more, maybe or less, but to be more open to being with difference, then we will encounter some difference. And well, you know, I think one of the I mean, people will encounter that in the conversations they have with each other, because there will be like the very encounter with like, why am I even here? Why am I wanting to do this? Like, what am I hoping maybe even to get out of this? Like, who am I bringing to this course? What part of myself is, what call am I responding to here? How can it actually be possible to do these, to even justify in an embodied way to know oneself as becoming something worthwhile, to fulfilling some sort of potential, to treating, to be able to have, let's say, more healthier relationships, which might mean ending certain relationships, you know, like it's, but my general sense of this, to make it quite simple, is that attending to and reflecting on, but coming to know in the imminence of relating to someone, in the imminence of crafting one's voice, seeking to express in a way that is including what's present, but where what is being included here is there's something of a telos, like in the sense that speaking from a basis of what matters, of what is valued, speaking from a basis of values in a way that is touching the space, necessarily engaging in influence, participating in relationship, that is actually having an effect that is meaningful, that is desirable, where that feeds in to a context of relationality which is capable of valuing and it's all these words to be used, you know, but there's a treatment of each other, and there's a like knowing when to speak, developing the capacity to know when to speak, when to hold, when to sit back in the recognition that someone else can voice that there's something to be added, there's something to bring to the table that someone else can, and appreciating that, and in some sense, knowing that expression as an opportunity to further and develop one's capacity to meet and appreciate and enjoy life as it reflects, as it expresses from that which is beyond oneself. Like ultimately, we're wanting to, I think, I say I think, but this is, I'm stating this, I'm trying to be here in a way that is saying how it seems to me, in some sense, what I am in a mode of dedication to, no doubt deluded in many ways that I am. But what is it to be that which knows, and this is something, you speak to brilliantly well. It's a core part of the deep resonation we share, is an integration of the death aspect here. What is it to love the future that you won't be part of? And yet, without that love, without that fundamental affirmation of life death process as being and becoming, like, for what it is, and for what it could be, but there's a crucible we move through, and we know not what's on the other side. And yet there's something about the way in which we have an opportunity to conduct ourselves in a fashion that that affirms life, that affirms the future, that and I mean life in a very inclusive sense here. I don't necessarily want to juxtapose life with something like intelligence or creativity. I mean the whole shebang, for all of its shadow, for all of its horror, for all of the oppositional tension. There's something about our capacity to be like, it's like I have nothing profound to say. It's just we want to try and do this thing well or not, do we want to try and hold each other to some account of wellness? We want to value this thing, and it's there is a profoundly Nietzschean element to where I'm coming from here, like at some like that, in terms of that valuation, that deep affirmation. And it's not an egoic thing. It doesn't come from there, it doesn't need words. It doesn't need words. And so I should stop. And in many respects, I suppose that world peace is how can we move toward building something that is worth the finite energy we have to expend on. That's it. And that's an open fucking question, but it needs to be grappled with.
Yeah, and it is a deeply Nietzschean perspective here, especially this idea of loving the future that you will not be a part of. I remember there's one of my favorite parts of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where Nietzsche's talking about passing the golden ball on and asking for forgiveness, that he stays a little bit longer. Like he's asking you to forgive him that I'm still around. I'm still, I haven't passed the ball on yet, but I'm trying to pass the ball on.
That's so beautiful. That really is. I mean, that's I hope for that. Jesus Christ, I hope for that.
Well, he says the mantra is die at the right time. It still sounds strange, and what he means by that is like. It seems strange to both affirm life and to try to die at the right time, because one of the things that's underappreciated, I think, about Nietzsche is that he doesn't value life for longevity's sake. In other words, it's not, his goal isn't let's live till 90 and like the last 30 years of our life are just, wasting away at an old age home. He actually says something along the lines of dying at the right time means that you have both a transcendental goal, meaning a goal which transcends your life, and an heir. So you're passing on the ball to an heir. That could be a child, or that could be a disciple who you pass the ball on, and they continue the transcendental goal type of thing like that. But
exactly, what could it be? What could it be? That's
it's
what
very
I love.
open.
Exactly. It's so open that is, I think that what constitutes an heir is possibly one of the most vexing and underappreciated questions. I think humanity has not developed a mature sense of what that means, and it's possibly one of the things that's damning us the most.
Well, it's connected to the point you made earlier in our talk about the developmental and intergenerational dynamics breaking down, and Nietzsche is precisely trying to make a intervention, a cut into, and he does this with various figures like the kings, where they accept that, okay, the time of the kings is over, in the sense of the heir is a biological inheritance, right? You become a king just because I was born into becoming a king. I was born into a royal family. Whereas Nietzsche is trying to say, no, the rulers of the earth should be the overmen who win their leadership by experience. They didn't get born into it. And I think he's trying that the heir should be also won by experience, or something along this direction. And I think that introduces what you were trying to point towards here, where the commons is not totalizing and it's not denying the reality of competition and rivalry. These are dynamics that are an inherent part of reality. And the model that I have in my head that's real, and I think you'll appreciate this, but the model I have in my head that I use to think about this is actually the transcendental wisdom of an athlete. Because if you're an athlete and you know athletics and you've played sports and you've been on a team, I know in my head when I was, my sports was my life, was you don't want the competition to end. You play a game, the game's over. When's the next game? I can't wait. Like you got your ass kicked. All right, I'm coming back at you next time, right? Like, and there's a certain wisdom in that mentality which both affirms that, like, what would a football soccer game be if there was no competition, right? It's just passing the ball between each other, right? So you got to have that competition, and at the same time, there's a deep cooperation and a deep respect. Like, and all of the greatest athletes have a deep respect for one another. Like if you look at the phenomenon of the famous, like the dudes who will swap jerseys at the end of a game, right? You're swapping jerseys with your competitor, right? Like that's a deep respect. I'm going to hang I played against this guy, right? Like, and I'm going to remember that forever. Like, we went head to head and stuff like that. So I think that element should be brought into philosophy a little bit more, like that, I think if that's missing, you miss some juice there. And I think there's just the wisdom of the athlete's mind there that is interesting to think about. But I think one of the questions I guess I would have here is what you were talking about, and it's connected to the heir problem and stuff like this. Is you emphasize in one of the chapters that this course is bringing us from the personal to the transpersonal to confront life, death, and other energies. And also, as you've already emphasized, to face the real of the culture we're actually participating in. And I think in some sense, you need to be able to look at both the personal, the transpersonal, life and death, to be able to really face the culture. So, as someone leading this course, how do you handle this aspect or think about this aspect?
Well, one of the things that's coming to me is that I think in order to, what I would invite of people is to, well, one of the invitations will be to cultivate a relationship with one's own expectations that they're necessarily bringing in, like in terms of what it is, like what do I want to get out of this, like what do I want to get out of it, you know? What a difficult thing to, I mean, we can say some things about that, you know, like in many respects I've tried to communicate the offering of this course in a way that can appeal to a desire for a certain becoming and for the cultivation of relationship and all of that. But there's a way to hold that, or well, yeah, maybe we can use the word hold just for brevity's sake. That's important, because if I come along to philosophy, if I come along to real address with others with an overfixed expectation and demand for what I need to take away from it, what I need to achieve, then I will be, in some important sense, stuck in the projections of my own personal sphere. It will be difficult to, like, you know, basically that itself becomes an obstacle, and we can be in real address with that. But in recognizing ourselves as bringing so much desire, let's say, whether it's for meaning, for becoming, for how it is we need to come across, for what others, how we want them to be, maybe how we want to be appreciated. So there's a relationship with my dad here, which is quite an interesting one, because my dad passed away at the beginning of this year in January. And I was
right for a loss.
Yeah, thank you. And I had been through an archetypal journey with him over time, and I'm grateful that we moved through what felt to me like the lowest end of the descent, let's say. And there was a reorientation that we got to spend at least 6 to 8 hours of conversation, and maybe 5 or 6 months dwelling in, not very long, and certainly his death was a tragedy. But I had a desire for a long time, through my teen years and in my early 20s. I wanted so much to be appreciated by my dad. I wanted to be known and supported and loved in a way that I felt was really supporting me, was really getting me. That archetypally it would be to be valued as the heir in some important sense, as worthy of whatever the kingdom is. And now, my relationship with my dad was multifaceted, and there were things that occurred which were challenging things, and not there were patterns, let's say, of father to son, which I do not aspire to live out again. But there was an aspect of how I wanted to be appreciated, which was blocking the possibility for me to connect with the love that he did have available, and the relationship that was actually available to be with. and that's speaking from my perspective of it, the aspect that I could be in responsibility for, not changing him, not changing how he saw me as like a convincing him or anything like that. We came to a point, and it involved some time of separation, some years, and it was necessary, and I don't regret it, even though there were aspects of that whole process which were very painful. I did what was right, certainly what I felt to be right, and I still believe to be right. But I was able to reconnect with him and be present with him in spite of a continued difference. I was not affected the same way by his what I perceived as misunderstanding, and was able to dwell in and be with what we actually were. The difference, like the untranslatability of a certain father to son element. There was ways my dad was doing it, which I don't aspire to do it like that. It would not serve me. It wouldn't be a particularly effective thing. But they were his ways, and for him, let's say that's all he knew. So I do think that I was able to develop let's say a transpersonally mature relationship with my dad, in a way that was able to affirm in some sense the personal reality that I felt and desired as a son, and was able to be present to the communicational channel between us in a way that was worthwhile. And because I did sacrifice the image I had of my father, certainly aspects of it, I didn't place the weight on him to fulfill my expectations, which I understand and don't blame myself for having. These are such obviously fundamental relationships and dynamics, identity forming structures, archetypal realities. And so this personal, transpersonal move, with respect to how I was speaking about it before, how we meet in conversation, how we meet each other to develop friendships and all manner of things, from the personal through the transpersonal, there's this profound opportunity for development that is, well, I guess just, again, it's like I could say a bunch of words here. I think it's more known. It's known in a kind of, it's known in a through a grit and an ordeal of love and effort and humility. I prefer to talk about it like this. I mean, I hope in the characterization I've given for people, there's something that can be connected to there, that to the degree that, and it's quite possible that what I'm saying is well understood by everyone listening, and that's great. But to the degree there's something that I'm trying to point at that might be in any way conveying some sense of something worthwhile to be in relationship with, in any sense, approaching a course or something like that, then I hope in something I've offered there's a way of, this is these contexts, these networks, these relationships that I want to be a part of and help co-build with everyone, really must have a maturity of understanding about how our expectations must give way to truth, or must give way to a return to the real. You know, if we can use the language in this conversation, and
yeah, I think it's really, this is the profound dimension you're hitting here. I think because, you know, for me, when I think about the relationship between the personal and the transpersonal, and I've exposed myself to some of the transpersonal psychology and the conferences, and I don't know, you know, I'd have to be corrected if I'm wrong, but you know, one of the things that strikes me is that, to me, the real dimension of the transpersonal is, you know, the type of relation you're describing with your dad. You know, that's as real as you can get. Like, and what that means is that it's holding a certain almost unbearable to think tension, right? It's holding an almost unbearable difference where, you know, you're juggling generations, you're juggling cultural transitions, you're juggling heirs and thrones and kingdoms, and, you know, and all these things. And that's deeply transpersonal, but it's also deeply existentially anxiety provoking and heartbreaking and even soul shattering, right? So it's in this is, and that's exactly, you know, what you're talking about, I think, when you say maturity of expectations must give way to truth, and where can we experience that more deeply than in our, you know, in the parent-child relationship, or in intimate contact. I mean, this is, you know, where the real gets almost too real. But you know, I guess connecting, you know, I think that's it's a good that you voice that and express that example, because I think it's a good example to bring into the Transformative Philosophy course as a way to help people think about those major categories that sort of you framed in your introduction, and which I try to frame as a question, namely the personal, the transpersonal, life and death, and then being able to look at the culture, you know, from this vantage point, right? Like, I think that's where that's where I think we get to the place of network building, and also I like the way you express this idea of, you know, this is a life's work, you know, this is a gateway to a life's work, and that's oftentimes something that's not, I mean, that's rare to find, and so this is, I think, a rare course. But I suppose, winding down, like, my last question is that, yes, this is your course, and this is a Voicecraft construction, but you're also bringing on some other voices and bringing on some other perspectives. So in regards to, you know, not only myself, but Layman Pascal, Christopher Mastro Pietro, did I pronounce that right? Mastro Pietro. Johnny Miller and Daniel Garner, or better known as OG Rose. You've already spoken to a little bit of that you're bringing on this cast of characters because there's a certain relationship, a certain conversational dynamic, which is ongoing with all of them. Could you maybe speak to the singularities of each of them? You know, what does each name bring into your soul?
Oh, yeah, that's such an awesome question. You know, these are actually, a question like that is something which appears in my, you know, in my fantasies, in my imaginings, because these are questions which, in the opportunity to respond to them and holding oneself to them, like, what a thing to share my perception of a person and share their value. Like, for you can, I genuinely believe you can learn a lot about someone, about dynamics, from listening to responses of these kinds of questions. And so this is an awesome, in the sense of opportunity, so, and a responsibility, you know. So I'll begin with Johnny, because he's listed, his module is listed first in order. Johnny is a man who has known grief, and he's known it in a way that isn't mine to speak to in terms of the story of it. It's a way that he's known it in a very profound way, and he's sort of crafted a being of response to it in a way that I've felt and I feel has resonated a courage and a hope and a love to those he has touched. I think he's a really beautiful man, and he's someone who I think is going to help people change their lives for the better in, well, I would say a subtle way, but in some sense, becoming conscious of how to modulate, operate, live with, integrate the energies of the body and the nervous system is maybe not so subtle at all. So in a very embodied way. He's someone that I haven't spoken to a tremendous amount. We've probably shared maybe 10 hours in conversation, but neither of us like mess about when it comes to interaction. So he's someone I trust to step forth and share value in a way that really will help people. So yeah, that's what I reflect on when I reflect on Johnny. In terms of like some practicalities, he's got a podcast called Curious Humans. He has a nervous system mastery course and I suppose platform that he teaches and facilitates workshops in relation to this, developing capacity to regulate the nervous system and participate in transformation in that way. So, and you can find out all this information on the Academy page and what have you, or just Google. Everybody's name can be Googled and you can find it. So, and next up, I believe, is Chris Mastro Pietro. Chris is this is a like a really profound philosophical being, and he's someone who I have dialogued with for the last probably 2 years, every few months, and sometimes a bit more frequent than that. And he's been a collaborator of John Vervaeke's, who's quite well known in these circles and cognitive scientist. And Chris has been a close collaborator, writing partner, is participated in many conversations online, sort of tagged with the Dialogos name. And I think he embodies, as everyone does, but he really embodies a being present to what is most intimately contending and responding to life as a living question. And he has qualities of participating in dialogue and in thinking and navigating together, which like he does several things in a really elite way. a really elite way that he probably wouldn't, he would probably balk a little bit at my expressing like that. But yeah, yeah, I mean that. I think he's a very powerful philosophical being, and a very I've known him to be a very caring soul. So he'll be his unit is not something he hasn't drafted the description for that yet, but fundamentally, I think he will. It is a unit themed around dialogos, and a lot of Chris's influences are sort of come from Socrates, Kierkegaard, and I know he's a reader of Jung and an appreciator of Jung as well. And of course, if anybody's been in the Viveki sphere, they'll be aware of his many collaborations with John, but also on Parallax, for example, and a number of other podcasts. So being taught in a context, having him sort of seed his dedication to a certain mode of interaction, which is really deeply in touch with the spirit of address that sort of we've shared here today, I think is a profound opportunity, because it's a bit like hearing a song or going somewhere beautiful. It's the subtleties of the context which provides that calling to respond to. And yeah, I'm very excited about what he has to share in this way, because yeah, I think he's a powerful and beautiful philosophical being. And you're next, mate. And you so of all the maybe I'd put OG into this category as well, because both of you are like far exceed my scholarly expertise in philosophy, and yet bring that into conversation and into your address with others in a way which, well, at least I experience it like this, and it's partly because I am capable of engaging in this way, but you bring it in a way that doesn't you're not looking to weigh people down or just share extra baggage that they somehow have to hold on to while trying to grasp what you're trying to, in the case of you, I could imagine some people meeting you as a certain kind of masculine presence that, if they didn't have in themselves a developed yet enough capacity to sort of step forward and maybe say, hang on, I don't understand in a particular way, can you share it in another way, or can you share a personal story, or what does this mean to you in terms of how you feel, and try to that you're someone that they might find to be maybe even too intense in the capacity you do have to share philosophy, considered more in terms of language and maps and models and these kinds of things. But the reality is you are willing to be there, and you step forward being to being. And I don't believe that your relationship to philosophy is dictated by 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 text to the detriment of the real of life and death and what really matters in relation. And as far as a philosophical characterization, for me, this is I mean this as a profound compliment, and that's why you're suitable for this course. And you bring an interesting piece, because I think you will be bringing probably maybe Chris as well, but maybe you might be bringing the most sort of content that will appear in a more traditionally, not academic way, but I do want this course to be that which also provisions people with a sense of really grappling with the history of philosophy as it is expressed through the teachers and through the people that are part of the course and each other and our sharing of that all together.
I just want
so you have like
to add
strong
quickly that the content is context specific, namely that I've generated this content for this course. I haven't taught it elsewhere. This will be the first time I'm teaching it, and it's a response to your call. So it's and that's how I try to do the content. I try to have content responsive to context, basically.
Yeah. So I guess to put a cap on that, I mean, the reason why I'm here and doing this and look forward to the future is that I've, since we started talking to each other, I've had a sense that there's a really interesting mixture of alignment and difference between us, which I think can be like really profoundly generative in terms of the contexts we can help build together. And I have tremendous respect for your for your philosophical work in the world at a number of levels. So yeah, man, it's awesome to be moving into this with you, no matter what bloody happens, hey. In terms of people come to the course or not, it's this is all a process, and I'm very glad to be doing it with you. So thank you. And and that brings us to the OG's a legend. He's such a fucking legend,
Legend in the game.
Yeah, he's he's a very rare being. I've never met anyone like Daniel, actually. And he has an incredible amount of energy, intelligence, perspective, like breadth, openness, care, and it's awesome to interact with him and work with him. So he's almost got so much to offer in terms of ideas and thinking that people will be getting like 0.1% or less of him, right? But he's someone that really appreciates and is as well feels a deep commitment, I think, to the building and the developing of what we're speaking about. And he's also someone that I'm trusting and willing to trust in the navigation of whatever comes along. There's a sense in which, as I'm saying all this, lots of compliments being handed out. I don't mean to only speak to the light in some important sense. The people that I want to build relationships with and work with are people who I'm willing to meet in difficulty. And it's not because I don't imagine everyone to have their own private battles and various like sort of affects of, you know, incapacity in various ways. And but that's the that's the real of character. So these are people that I feel anyway that I've been able to express myself authentically with, and so and to receive it in turn. So we take it from there. And yeah, he's someone who's quite active in the network, actually, in a number of different ways. And so he's probably closest to the project as such. And he's, you know, I know he works. He's been obviously a collaborator with yours, with Enter the Alien and the courses you're doing. And this guy just has such an incredible capacity to share his energy and work with lots of people. So yeah, he's a very rare guy. And the final person is Layman Pascal. And Layman's someone who I've known comparatively least among all the course faculty. But yeah, I mean, I followed his work since he started his channel a couple of years ago, because it's was speaking to certainly a deep resonance of interest. And he seems to be someone who has moved in the ecology of networks and the possibility space we've been referring to in maybe like in the most shamanic way, in the sense of I think he's shown probably the highest capacity matched with energy to actually do the thing. I'm not saying he's necessarily got the highest capacity. I do think he's got a very high capacity, but he's had so many conversations with all manner of people with different bases of value and intellectual background and points of concern and relevance. And he probably has his finger as well on the pulse of sort of tangible, concrete efforts at communing and developing culture in the practical sense. He's got his finger on the pulse of that as much as anyone that I can publicly see. Of course, there'd be plenty of other people. You know, I'm not claiming omniscience in the perception of all of this, but his unit will be probably the most emergent in that it's last, and it will be seeking to move from whatever capacity has been developed, whatever sense of presence and relationality in terms of cultivated capacity to be with each other and as ourselves, and to orient that toward the question of what comes next in terms of participation in networks, in terms of applying and sort of transmuting that energy of interest into next steps. And that's inherently challenging and is certainly like you know, least expectations attached. But you know, for anybody, you know, I know he's doing a course for Parallax. I think that is starting soon, but I think that, you know, there'll be still places available for that, and it would get going in a few days or a week. I'm not sure exactly when, but you can just head over, like type in, you know, Parallax Layman Pascal, and you'll find it. And he's doing a course about networks, the philosophy of networks, and a kind of an accompanying sort of metaphysical descriptions about like what constitutes a node, and how a connector is also in some important sense a separator. So it's this dynamic of being with difference in just different maps of language for helping to orient being together in the world. And I've sort of provided some pretty, maybe, you know, sometimes not so clear ones, but I think there's a commonality we all have, and in seeking to develop capacities to communicate with each other that can help us situate ourselves in the real, and situate also and to develop a relationship between the real that we are and are facing, with also the crafting of a structure, and each a kind of a crafting, but also an uncovering and a re-envisaging and a resourcing of mythos and narrative. Yes, I know Bard would use narratology, but a mythos and in some sense, a kind of a transpersonal identity, religion. People use this word, but a way of in some sense naming with in a mature way, and being in relationship to that process of naming, coming into formation in the world, coming into form, building lives together fundamentally. So there's a better way to bloody say that, but yeah, he's a I spoke to him the other day, and he's wearing his silk robe, and the cigar's just like a foot away, pulls out a cigar. So he'll be the resident pimp philosopher, I suppose.
Right. I'm gonna say
he's a very interesting
he's
dude.
definitely occupying that crack in the reel, I think.
Yeah.
All right. So I think this was a great introduction to the course, and I was able to sort of get to all of the questions that I had for you in regards to that. And I hope that this was a good space for you also to sort of go deeper in terms of what you want to bring with transformative philosophy. Again, sort of like the last thing I'll say is just that I've always perceived Voicecraft to be holding that space for the holding that space for unconditioned relations. Just to be able to go into the pure thought, to go into and talk and relate to others in a way that's not necessarily conditioned by corporatist or capitalist games or anything like that. And you've always held an interesting space for just what we started off with, the spirit of address. And so I think that's really a great foundation stone that you're working with, in my opinion. Of course, when it comes to entering these capitalist games and trying to build something which transcends those early beginnings, we oftentimes find out what the thing is, and I suppose this is part of that road to finding out what the thing is, and as you opened up in our talk here, that's going to require stepping into the unknown. It's going to require stepping into another way to say it, maybe stepping into the mystery of what this thing is, and I'm definitely happy to be along for the ride. So thank you for including me, and I definitely hope to step into this space with content that's informed by context, and which is open to my own personal self-transformation. I think one of the things that I've tried to hold on to as I've sort of stepped away from the formal academic game and into the whatever other type of game I'm trying to spin is a way in which let's say the abstract knowledge is always in some sort of feedback with the personal singularity. Yeah. So that relationship is something I'm trying to keep alive, and I see this as a continuation of that, which is quite natural and organic for me. So thanks, Tim. I'll let you have the last word. Where can they find this? I've left a link in the description. Visit Voicecraft. The link's in the description to the actual course itself. You can find a lot of information about the course and more about what Tim's up to. Check out Voicecraft on your own if you're so called. But yeah, Tim, I'll let you have the final word. Voicecraft and transformative philosophy.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Cadell. And thanks for the opportunity to those who are listening as well to express in this way. I'm trying to source as best I can what feels cool to be said in this context. And it's always the case that it's just a fragment of it. And the hope really is just that the signal of this and the integrity of this just touches enough, communicates enough, so that the people who can hear it do so, and that would be awesome. I really believe that for a selection of people, this is an awesome opportunity. I'm certainly dedicated to that. And so I do have an email that you can contact me on. You can find it at the link that Cadell's sharing just in the description below. So that the URL is voicecraft.io/academy. And the email is voicecraft.network@gmail.com. But you'll find that in the contact part. And if you're not sure about anything on there, in the way that I have here, I'm willing to respond with the truth that I can to questions, and we'll take it from there. Really, I mean, yeah, Cadell, I'm really looking forward to your contribution and the progression of all of this, and and we'll talk about this off air as well. But
Tim's got the best hair in the game.
Yeah, indeed.
You can't.
I spent years of my life resisting my hair, years of my life resisting my hair. And I was reflecting on mine the other day. We can tell that as a story another time. But I've only in the last 2 years been able to accept that my hair as it is. And so here we are. And it's going to probably be here for a while.
You accept, and you got the best in the game.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, all right, brother. Thank you so much, and I look forward to what comes next. And you guys will definitely, hopefully, be hearing from Cadell on the Voicecraft podcast soon, because I would love to do a session with you, Cadell, soon. You've been requested as someone to step into the elder circle, as you know, and so I think that would be an awesome thing to do.
Gotta regrow the beard, maybe.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that beard you had was fucking wild. All right, well, we'll see how that goes anyway. But thanks everybody for listening. If you stayed this long, I really drew out some of those answers, and yeah, it's been a pleasure, and looking forward to what comes next.
All right.